Thank you. The next item of business is consideration of Business Motion 20900 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Bureau, setting out revisions to this week's business. Could I call on Graham Day to move the motion?
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. No member has indicated they wish to speak on the motion. Therefore, the question is that motion 20900 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Thank you. We're going to turn now to topical questions. Our first question today is from Mark Ruskell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what lessons have been learned from the recent closure of the Queensferry crossing.
Cabinet Secretary Michael Matheson.
Presiding Officer, following the occurrence of ice falling in March 2019, Transport Scotland engaged with a range of expert advisors and undertook a review of worldwide experience of this issue. The review concluded that operational management remained appropriate and that arrangements be made to enhance it by additional forecasting and monitoring. Acting on lessons learned, our engineers were monitoring the conditions on the 10th of February, allowing them to act quickly when conditions worsened. Initial learning from the event on the 10th of February has resulted in a 5-point plan being put in place to further enhance monitoring and gather increased intelligence from the observations. Furthermore, a full debrief is due to take place on the 24th of February. A technical briefing will also be provided to REC committee members as well as local MSPs. This is to inform them of the circumstances of the closure, our developing understanding of why this happened and how we plan to respond to these challenges ahead. Finally, looking forward, visual monitoring remains a primary source of understanding the effects of these conditions, and this will be assisted by the installation of ice sensors in the coming months. The design of the bridge was, of course, approved by Parliament in 2011.
Mark Ruskell.
Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response? The closure of the bridge obviously came as a shock to many, not least Fife Council, who informed me last week that they had no prior warning of the plan to close the bridge from either Transport Scotland or Amy, nor were they consulted on this action. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm to me if there is a formal emergency closure procedure in place for the bridge? And if so, who are the key stakeholders in this procedure? Was the procedure implemented according to the plan? And why were local councils excluded from the process this time round?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I do understand and recognise the difficulties that it caused people, and I very much regret that, given there was a very quick decision made to close the bridge. As I'm sure the member would appreciate, and others in the chambers would appreciate, is that was taken for safety reasons. It was recommended by the operators Amy, and it was supported by Police Scotland, which is why the action was taken to close the bridge within a short period of time. My understanding is, from the discussions I've had with engineers involved in this decision, is that they did engage or seek to engage with Fife Council in order to make them aware of this because of the diversion works that would need to be put in place. And alongside that, they also contacted public transport providers to look at what enhanced public transport provision could be made. So I do understand that there were attempts to make contact with Fife Council within a very limited period of time that was available between the decision to close the bridge and the diversion being put in place. But of course, the debrief which I mentioned that the engineers and those managing the bridge will be taking forward on the 24th of February is an opportunity to look at what further measures can be put in place to improve communication when such incidents occur again in the future.
Mark Ruskell.
Well, I welcome that these are matters that can be considered at the debrief and hopefully lessons can be learned. But last Tuesday, I was also contacted by residents in Kincardine, whose village has once again turned into gridlock following the official advice from Transport Scotland for people to divert via the Kincardine and Clackmannanshire bridges. Given the opening of the Queensferry crossing has resulted in over 1 million extra vehicle journeys across the Forth, will the Cabinet Secretary accept that simply diverting traffic via Kincardine is no longer an option, and that emergency closure plans need to be developed which prioritise the modal shift to public transport first and foremost?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I do very much recognise the concerns and challenges that they've created for residents who live on a diversion route, particularly in places such as Kincardine. What I can say to the member is that one of the actions that was taken forward at the time when the decision to close the bridge was arrived at was to look at what enhanced public transport provision could be provided. So, for example, the Forth Road Bridge, one of the carriageways is presently undergoing major refurbishment work, but the other carriageway is operating as a contraflow for public transport provision. It was agreed with Stagecoach and bus providers that there would be a 50% increase in bus provision provided the following morning for those trying to make their way into Edinburgh, and again for those trying to make their way from Edinburgh into Fife. And alongside that, ScotRail looked at what enhanced services they could provide on the morning peak time services, which they were able to enhance, along with providing additional buses to deal with any overcrowding that may occur as well. So the first port of call, as soon as the diversion had to be put in place, was to look at enhancing the public transport provision. However, one of the actions that I've asked my officials to look at in the future is that, given there was major refurbishment work taking place on the Forth Road crossing, is that in future winter periods, is that we look to minimise the works that may be being carried out on the Forth Road crossing, so it could be used as a diversion route should that be required, which would reduce the need for the extended diversion route through places such as Kincardine.
And just for the Minister and members' interest, there are 8 members wish to ask for the supplementaries in this, so we'll try and get through as many as we can. Murdo Fraser to be followed by Gordon MacDonald. Murdo Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Just on the Minister's last point, one of the most frustrating aspects of the closure last week for my constituents in Fife was the fact that they were not able to divert across the Forth Road Bridge for entirely understandable reasons. But given what the Minister has just said, in the event of a potential future closure of the Queensferry crossing, will there be consideration given to allowing vehicles to access both carriageways on the Forth Road Bridge, thus avoiding some of the congestion that Mark Ruskell has referred to in West Fife villages?
Cabinet Secretary.
Officer, I think the member raises a reasonable point. There is a challenge to make sure that we get the balance between the public transport provision alongside that of being able to use it as a diversion route for cars as well. And I've already asked my officials to explore that as a possibility. So it is something which I'm very keen to explore and to understand. We also have to recognise that in doing that, it could cause significant congestion in areas such as South Queensferry, given that there would have to be temporary roadworks put in place as well. So all of these have to be worked through, but I've asked officials to make sure we do so, including the very point the member has made, which is an opportunity to identify whether there are further measures that can be put in place to manage these issues better.
Gordon MacDonald, followed by Colin Smith.
I think that most motorists understand that safety has to be paramount, and the closure of the bridge was indeed due to exceptional weather conditions. But can the Cabinet Secretary outline what measures are in place to optimise information sharing with motorists, and how can this be improved going forward? Cabinet
Secretary.
Presiding Officer, as soon as the decision was made that the bridge was to close, there was a range of information which was placed out in the national media and across social media to inform people of the decision and the implications it would have for them, including the need to use a diversion route and also enhancement of public transport provision being put in place. Clearly, it's important we make sure that when these types of incidents occur, that we communicate it as timely and as effectively as possible. But I'm sure all members will recognise that when a safety issue arises in the nature in which it did last week, it is important that action is taken swiftly. There were attempts to try and communicate that as effectively as possible, but I'm always prepared to make sure that we look at how we could enhance that in the future, and I'll make sure that the points that have been raised by Ms MacDonald and others are issues that are taken forward in a debrief.
Colin Smith to be followed by Jamie Green.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, this issue was first identified last March, and you advised that the Rural Economy and Connectivity Committee in May that contractors had been, I quote, appointed to monitor the issue, identify the exact source of it and look at what mitigation may have to be put in place. If this work has been ongoing since the spring, what exactly have those mitigation measures achieved, and why was the full level of mitigation not put in place in time for this winter?
Cabinet Secretary.
So, Presiding Officer, there's been a range of work which has been taken forward. As I mentioned, they've engaged with expert advisors and also taken advice worldwide on this particular problem and ways in which it can be more effectively addressed. There's a number of points that have come from that about enhancing the weather forecasting for the bridge, also to look at the introduction of weather sensors and also ice sensors. This was all finalised last November and has been in procurement, and the award of that procurement exercise is due to take place in the next couple of weeks, with the plan to install these sensors in the coming months. Having said that, though, all the expert advice and international advice is that human observation is a critical element in identifying whether there is any icing taking place on the bridge's structures. The incident which occurred last March was from an unspecified area on the bridge. At that time, the engineers were not able to identify where the icing had come from. The incident which occurred last week was clearly coming from the cables, which now plays into the approach that they take with the ice sensors and the installation of any other equipment which will be necessary to monitor this matter. However, mitigation measures could be more complex. Given that this is something which only occurs in very specific circumstances, so for example, there was no problem on the Queensferry crossing during the Beast for the East with snow or ice accumulation on the bridge. There have been no problems in other periods where there has been adverse weather. It appears to be in very specific circumstances that this problem has occurred, and that will make it more challenging in looking to try to find a means by which to mitigate it. However, that's part of the work which will be taken forward by the engineers in the weeks and months ahead.
Jamie Green, to be followed by Alistair Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I take this opportunity to welcome some new members to the Government's front bench, and also to say to the Cabinet Secretary for Transport, thank him for the manner in which we've conducted our debates these past few years. Going back to the bridge, though, the decision to close the bridge for safety reasons was the right one, but prior to that decision being made, several vehicles were damaged. It is a miracle, frankly, that nobody was injured or even worse. Winter is not over, Cabinet Secretary, so considering the severity of the consequences of falling ice, what reassurances can you give motorists who use this crossing that in similar inclement weather they can be sure to cross that bridge safely without any fear or risk to themselves or their vehicles?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, I'm sorry if I'm behind the news, but I get the impression that Mr Green is on the move to another portfolio. I've enjoyed my time in my exchanges with him, and I wish him well in his new portfolio. On his more substantive point, what I said to you is there's a 5-point plan which is put in place. That's about enhanced monitoring which will take place alongside the additional forecasting. One of the measures that has come from the incident last week is that the forecasters and engineers have a clearer understanding of the perimeters in which this type of icing takes place, which they didn't have from the incident that occurred last March. So they're now in a position where they can more accurately predict when this is likely to happen in order to look at when they need to undertake enhanced monitoring of the cables, given that that's where the location of the icefall last week, or the icefalls last week, have been taking place. So that these additional measures will be put in place now should the weather forecast indicate that there is a potential risk for this to take place, which is over and above what was already in place prior to this winter. And of course, once the sensor equipment goes in as well, that will provide them with an additional measure to support their understanding of this. But the primary source of checking it will be through visual checks, which appears to be the core way in which this is addressed right across the world in identifying any icing problems on large structures of this nature.
Alistair Hamilton, followed by Liz Smith.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm very grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for the extensive briefing he offered opposition parliamentarians last week. It's now 2 years since the Queensferry crossing was given motorway designation, and this problem of icing is just one of a number of issues that have emerged through its operation, including problems with road layout towards the bridge access and a number of other issues in terms of traffic flow around South Queensferry. These were meant to be swept up in the one-year review, which was meant to be published in December 18, yet we are still waiting for this review. Can the Cabinet Secretary confirm finally to the Chamber when this review will be published?
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the review has been delayed. It's been delayed because of challenges around data which were being used for the assessment work. My understanding is that Transport Scotland expect to receive that review in the spring of this year, which will then have a technical review completed on it. And as soon as the technical review has been completed, the review will be published.
Liz Smith.
Thank you. The Cabinet Secretary said in his response to Murdo Fraser that his team would be looking at the different approaches to the Forth Road Bridge in situations where there were difficulties. Could I ask the Cabinet Secretary just to confirm whether that is only when there are severe problems in terms of weather, or whether that is a general part of the plan to review the actual approach roads? And what Mr Cole-Hamilton has just said, that there are issues out with bad weather times. Will he confirm that he's looking at that as well?
Cabinet Secretary.
I can confirm that is not the case. It will only be for the purposes of where there is an event where the Queensferry crossing is not available and can't be used. So it will only be in exceptional circumstances. It will not be as a matter of routine in the way in which the member referred to.
Thank you. And apologies to Alexander Stewart and Dean Lockhart. We haven't been able to get through all the questions, and Claire Baker. Question number 2, Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what support it is giving to communities affected by recent flooding.
Minister Mary Goujon.
I visited Newcastleton myself this morning to see the storm and flooding damage, and the First Minister visited Hawick yesterday. And my sympathies go out to those who've been affected by the recent severe weather. And I really want to pay tribute to the first-class response by local authorities, emergency responders, and the public themselves, who really went above and beyond to help others, and that was often to the detriment of their own properties. Now, reducing flood risk is a priority for this government, and we will continue to support authorities to deliver actions that protect our communities, as well as raising awareness amongst the public and businesses.
Rachel Hamilton.
I thank the Minister for that answer. And as she will know, at the weekend, Storm Dennis caused unprecedented flooding across the entire Borders region, with Newcastleton being worst hit and the river reaching the highest recorded ever level. Over 70 homes in the village have been affected. However, it is estimated that many more will be affected in outlying rural areas. Many people have had to be rehoused, including elderly and vulnerable people, and the roads in the local area are almost impassable. The B6399 has 7 major areas that are unsafe, and the B6357 will remain closed till Saturday due to the damage and destruction left by the storm. Essentially, this already remote village is cut off in most directions. And I want to thank, as well as the Minister, the resilience team who've worked tirelessly to ensure that residents in Newcastle have been rehomed or looked after. However, you know, Minister, more resources are needed. And following the visit this morning, can I ask the Minister what immediate support will be given to the village of Newcastleton by the Scottish Government to assist them in clearing flood roads and clearing drain water and flood water? Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you. I mean, I would really echo a lot of what Rachel Hamilton has just said, because that was really what I got from the meeting, and meeting some of the residents today and the people who'd been involved in the immediate response was really just that sense of isolation. I completely understand the part about the roads as well, a lot of which are still cut off in the area, which has just compounded the problem there. But that's why, I mean, as a result of that meeting, discussing all the issues and all the different issues that people came across throughout that period over the weekend, we've undertaken, well, I've undertaken some actions immediately as a result of that, because again, as Rachel Hamilton talked about, housing is a major issue, and it's that temporary accommodation for people, and I know that that's being looked into, but that's also something that I'm raising with the Housing Minister, so we can see how we can really take that forward and make sure that everybody gets the accommodation that they need, because I am absolutely committed to helping out, and this government doing what we can to support the local authority, as well as supporting the local people and businesses there too. So again, there were a whole host of issues that were raised today. Some of these we can hopefully help with immediately. There are more issues that will need to be looked at in the medium and longer term, but I would be more than happy to go back to Newcastleton and arrange that with the member, perhaps in a few months' time, or as things settle down a bit, to see how that has progressed and to see how we really move things forward from there.
Rachel Hamilton.
I very much thank the Minister for her response there, and it's indeed encouraging that she visited and has addressed these issues directly. But we know that incidences of flooding are only going to get worse as the frequency of major climatic events increase. Villages such as Newcastleton, and indeed other villages in rural areas, are often the worst affected by flooding events, as they don't have the same large-scale flood defences as much larger towns. And given the nature of the widespread flooding from both Storm Dennis and Storm Ciara, the local council will be left with a significant repair bill. And at a time when funding is under huge pressure to those local authorities, I also would like to ask the Minister regarding the flood risk management budget line of 2.7 million, which looks as though there's been a 10% reduction in real terms. I'd like her to look into that to consider what future funding there is in the budget. We do need to see the Scottish Government addressing this, and I do believe that they are taking this seriously. But in the future, with Minister outline exactly what support is on offer to the village going forward, and will the Scottish Government take seriously the calls for better flood defences in Newcastleton and other rural villages that are often so overlooked?
Minister.
I think the member raises another important point there, which I will come back to the substantive point of that answer. But I mean, when we look at Storm Ciara and the damage that had been done there, I think there was actually, that's what I found quite interesting about this event in particular, was the fact that there was double the amount of rainfall in the previous storm compared to what there was with this storm, but combined with snowmelt and other factors, that really compounded the problem here. But that is why, again, I would say that the Scottish Government is absolutely committed to doing what we can. And that's why we have committed to providing a minimum of £42 million a year until 2026. And that's there and available for local authorities. But there is also the Bellwyn scheme, and I can write to the member and provide her with more details about that, which allows ministers to make additional revenue support to local authorities to assist them with immediate and unforeseen costs in dealing with the aftermath of emergency incidents. So there are a few different options there, but again, I really want to look at this holistically, see what we can do in the short, medium and longer term to make sure that our communities are as resilient as possible, and that we are working in partnership with everyone to make sure that when these events happen, because they will happen again, that we get our response right.
Emma Harper.
Thank you, President Officer. Can the Minister outline how local authorities, including Dumfries and Galloway Council, can access the support that she has outlined just now?
Minister.
I thank the member for that question, and I would say it's probably similar to my previous response, and that we do have extra funding available, or that would be available through the Bellwyn scheme. And the key criteria of that scheme is to safeguard life and property and prevent suffering or severe inconvenience. So any local authority that wants to make a claim should inform the government of that emergency incident, which it considers meets the criteria of the scheme, and then that would be further considered. So this could well be something that could be considered as part of that scheme.
Thank you very much. And question number 3, Annabel Ewing.
Officer, to ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide an update on elevated flaring at Musmoran.
Minister Mary Goujon.
A period of elevated flaring occurred on Thursday, the 13th of February, during the restart of Fife Ethylene Plant, and SEPA recorded a significant increase in complaints regarding the site during this period. We fully appreciate the concerns and anxieties of local communities regarding the impact of flaring, as has been expressed repeatedly in this chamber. Prior to the recent shutdown, the frequency of unplanned flaring was unacceptable, and our expectation is that work carried out during the shutdown, combined with work to address SEPA's permit variations, will bring about a reduction in the frequency and the impact of flaring.
Annabel Ewing.
I thank the Minister for her answer, but I would wish to stress that the unplanned elevated flaring last Thursday night was truly apocalyptic in its manifestations, and I don't know if the Minister managed to see it. I certainly did. It went on for 4 long hours, causing extreme disturbance by way in particular of light pollution, and also instilled fear and alarm on the part of many of my constituents. Surely, Minister, it is now time that SEPA press for an accelerated timescale for the proposed new ground flare capacity to be installed, because the current position is entirely unacceptable.
Minister.
I completely understand the concerns that the member has raised, and I think that has been expressed through the number of complaints that were received during that incident. But SEPA has been clear on its objectives of making flaring, which is an important safety mechanism, the exception rather than routine. And SEPA's action is driving the installation of noise-reducing flare tips in this year and in 2021, and the planning, design, then delivery of new ground flare capacity as soon as possible thereafter. The ExxonMobil chemical site at Mossmoran is jointly regulated by the Health and Safety Executive and SEPA, both of which are independent of Scottish ministers.
Annabel Ewing.
Again, I know what the Minister says, but for many of my constituents, the fact of the matter is that their patience has now been exhausted. Does the Minister agree, therefore, that it is time for SEPA to get tough with the enforcement powers that it has and impose stringent penalties for breaches by the operators? And given that SEPA's investigation into the April 2019 unplanned elevated flaring incident is about to be completed, will the Minister now commit to commissioning an independent inquiry into the environmental, health and social impacts of Mossmoran?
Minister.
Thank you. Again, I completely understand the strength of feeling around this. Now, in relation to the investigation that Annabel Ewing raised, SEPA has confirmed that it's focused on a rapid conclusion to its independent regulatory investigation, and that is being undertaken to an evidential standard. Now, SEPA's enforcement powers are exercised independently of government and in line with SEPA's publicly available enforcement guidance in order to maximise transparency. And it wouldn't be appropriate for me to comment in any way which would prejudice SEPA's independent regulatory investigation or limit its ability to act. However, SEPA has been clear that compliance with Scotland's environmental laws is non-negotiable. But given that action that's already been taken by regulators, and I know that there's also planned investment by the operators and the publication of a recent report by NHS Fife, it's not clear what any independent inquiry would add at this particular time. However, that is something that will be kept under review.
Alexander Stewart, followed by Alec Rowley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Residents feel utterly abandoned, and management and ministers are on this flaring issue, Minister. The community wants action, not words. Will therefore the Minister commit to meeting with local residents in the community to allay their fears and support their concerns as a matter of urgency?
Minister.
Again, I would just reiterate, we absolutely appreciate the concerns and anxieties of local communities. However, as it's been previously indicated, ministers intervening wouldn't be appropriate while SEPA has an ongoing regulatory investigation, but please be assured that we are receiving regular updates on the situation.
Alec Rowley.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. What we need is an independent inquiry that will look at the condition of the plant itself. I was a teenager when that plant was built. I have lived in the communities around that plant most of my life, and I'm well aware that the flaring, unplanned flaring, happens when something in the plant breaks and it's a safety precaution. So if it didn't flare, there'd be a danger of the plant, perhaps. As a young person asked at a public meeting recently, is it safe? Will it blow up? And that links to the second question of the independent inquiry that Fife Council and Annabel Ewing has just raised about the health and well-being. So there are two issues. What is the condition of that plant? Because people living in that area are living in fear that that plant one of these days is going to go up in smoke, and the consequences of that. That then knocks on to the health and well-being of the people, because people are living in fear next to that plant. It can't be allowed to continue, so the government needs to, and I ask again, will you order an independent inquiry into the condition of the plant so that we can get some reassurances about how safe or otherwise that plant is? And will you then look at the impact on the health, the mental health and well-being of the people in the communities surrounding that plant?
Minister.
Again, I completely understand the strength of feeling that there is around this, and as a government we absolutely take those concerns seriously. But again, as I've said in previous responses, I think we have to wait and see the outcome of SEPA's investigation, and it's not appropriate for us to intervene on that because they are the independent regulatory body. So we need to see the outcome of that. And again, given that action, I mean, this is also something that involves HSE too, but given the action that's already being taken, again, that planned investment and the work that's already been done by NHS Fife, it would be difficult to see what an independent inquiry would add to that at this time. But that doesn't mean that it would be ruled out, and that is something that we will keep under review.
Thank you very much. And apologies to Mark Bruscall. I'm afraid we've already run over, so we need to end portfolio questions there.